May 7th, 2020 Corvallis School Board meeting. And the first item of the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're willing and able, please join me to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Unfortunately, we could not. We don't have our board member Tina Baker with us tonight, who couldn't join us. However, we have everyone else. So thanks for coming. And the first item on the agenda, and I want to welcome everyone who's watching us over YouTube channel. The first item on the agenda is the board member reports. So do we have any board members who would like to report? And I would like to ask board members to raise their virtual hands through the participants panel. Vince?
Mm-hmm. Would this time be appropriate for saying some words of appreciation for teachers?
Absolutely, I think so.
So let me pull a document in front of me here. So this week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and this is a momentous time to be thinking about the practice of teaching. And as I've thought about this over the week, I've really come down to this question of what is our school district, what are our teachers teaching our children right now? And of course, you know, they're learning the 3 R's. They're getting core content that we're delivering through distance learning, but I think they're learning a lot more than that right now. They're learning that even when things are challenging, that we can still find a way to get our work done. They're definitely learning that there are many ways of learning. We're seeing lots of different methodologies, and goodness, we're using a lot of technology right now, more than we ever have before to be teaching. They're learning that we can learn to be resilient when we're facing adversity. And they are learning that there are ways to attend to our own well-being and to those around us, despite, you know, the separation that we're all experiencing right now. They're learning that community matters. We're teaching them that education matters. We're teaching our children that they and their learning deeply matters to us, the leaders of their community, their parents. And to that end, teachers matter because none of that learning could happen without them. I've always appreciated the impact of teachers in my life that they've had on me. It's part of the reason why I ran for the school board. I also appreciate the kind and skilled educators that have influenced the lives of my children. But this year is different because when I hear my child's teacher through the iPad at the kitchen table, I know that that person has had no choice but to retrain to teach in this way with very little preparation. That they too are threatened by COVID-19, that they fear for their loved ones as well, that they yearn for some semblance of normal, just like all of us. And despite all the hardship, they bring learning into my home like a lifeline, a joyful assurance that this is all temporary, that we will get through this, even if it doesn't look perfect. And for that lesson, I'm very thankful. So to all the teachers that are in the district and across Oregon, I wish you all a very happy and well-deserved Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank you so much for all that you do for our children. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Vince. Sarah?
Yes, everything Vince said. I also absolutely appreciate that teachers, in addition to providing a lifeline to our kids, are often at home being the lifeline for their own kids And so the work that's being done to support all the kids in our community by people who are juggling the same crazy isolation that we all are is just immense. And it's hugely important to our kids, especially for the kids for whom that teacher may be the only person outside of their family that they get to see. And so keeping those connections to our community is really huge. But that's not the only thing I have to talk about. Last weekend, I was supposed to be in Salem at the OSBA Legislative Policy Committee spring meeting. And of course, that didn't happen. So Saturday, I will spend a couple hours on Zoom with that committee. Things look very different from when we met in the fall, and we're still celebrating the Student Success Act, and we're making plans for, now that we got that passed in the last legislative session, what do we think about for the future legislative sessions? I think that we're probably going to go back to spending a lot of time thinking about funding and holding on to all the funding we can get for our kids, and working at figuring out how going forward we can get legislative support for our schools and to help our schools adjust to what may be a reality that changes for a while. So it should be an interesting meeting, even if it's more Zoom. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sammy,
Yes, there
I
is.
do have something to share.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, my video is not on right now. I may turn it on in a little bit, but this room is creates a lot of glare, and so it's a distraction. But it's the only quiet place to be. So, I wanted to share a couple of things. One is in terms of teacher appreciation, I wanted to just take a moment and say that I have been observing over these several weeks now, listening to my son in his Zoom classes with his teachers. And he's at Garfield. He has 2 teachers. They're both on with them. And so it's been entertaining to listen to these conversations, which take about 15 minutes fully of people just saying hi to each other. Hi, so-and-so, hi, so-and-so, so by the time they've all said hi to each other, it's like that call's half over. But I'm appreciative of the teachers who are really bringing their hearts to I hear Maestro Ruben playing his guitar, and I get to listen to it from the dining room table, and so I wonder if they are at all aware of how very grateful we are for those 30 to 40 minutes 3 times a week when we just don't have to have eyes on our kids or wonder what they're doing. I appreciate the calls, if for no other reason than because I am not on for those minutes. That's 90 minutes a week of work time, But the other day, my son, I was on a conference call, and he was on his Zoom call, and everyone's on calls in different rooms in the house. And he comes and he runs and he busts through the door in the middle of my call, and he says, "Mom," and I said, "I'm on the phone. I can't talk right now." "But Mom, I have to tell you this." "But I'm on the phone. I can't talk right now." "But I have to tell you this." At some point, it just becomes easier to just, let them say what they need to say to move on, right? So he says, "I need to tell you while you're on the call so everyone can hear it." And I'm thinking, there is nothing this child can say that my coworkers need to hear, but whatever. And he says to me, "Mrs. Stark is having a baby in September." And I was like, okay, that's great news. And, thank you for sharing. And he leaves. And I'm still at a loss as to why this is something we all need to hear. So after he gets off his Zoom call and I get off my call, I say to him, out of curiosity, why did you need to say that when my coworkers were on? And this is what he said to me. He said, "Mom, babies are happy. They bring joy. Everybody needs a little bit of joy right now. So I wanted your coworkers to know too." And I loved that. And I thought that was so great. And so I want to say thank you to Mrs. Stark for sharing that news. I am sad that you had to share it to a Zoom group, but I am so glad that you chose to do it anyway, because it brought joy to all of us to watch Quinlan be so full of joy about this news, and babies make everyone happy. So how cool was that? Anyway, that's been my experience of watching these teachers teach through Zoom, and I'm convinced that they are bringing their hearts and they're managing to teach it. And so that's amazing to me. And babies are happy. So yay for all of that. The other thing I wanted to say is that my son and I have been walking around Garfield and taking pictures because the Garfield construction is underway. And so we've decided a fun project living across the street will be to document the changes in the building over time. And so we're walking around and we're photographing it from each side every day. And I look forward to sharing what we find. He was disappointed to learn that there were no changes between yesterday's picture and today's picture, but it will be a good lesson for him in learning about how building actually happens and takes time. But if you live in or around one of the projects that's happening in our schools, I would just encourage you as parents, if you can, to let that be a learning opportunity to watch the kids watch the transformation of their learning spaces and maybe bring a little bit of hope that they'll be back inside those buildings at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, and keep them connected to the physical space of their buildings. And it is fun. And so far we've seen a couple of people and they've waved to us through the fence. So that was also social contact. I'm counting that as social contact. So anyway, that's all that I have.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Jay? Let me unmute you first.
Thank you. Hello?
Yes. Yes, now we are. I can hear you.
I'm sorry. When I go out of one of my screens, I no longer have video. So I'm sorry. But I did want to say with huge, huge appreciation, I think Vince's comments were right on the money. My experience the last 3 to 4 weeks has been as a observer of student teachers who are not in classrooms, but are working closely with classroom teachers to try to deliver high school social studies. And I have to be really honest, I'm a very positive person and I love what teachers do, but it is really, really hard to deliver as a teacher these days. So I appreciate the hard work that they're going through. I don't want to paint it any other way than I hope we're done with this real soon, because it just makes me appreciate what goes on regularly in classrooms and how this is not, I don't think we can paint it as a positive. We have got to move to a better spot, but with deep appreciation and care for teachers, thank you for all your hard work. That's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I want to add a couple of things. First, I want to reiterate everything my colleague said on this Teacher Appreciation Week. I really want to reflect the deep gratitude for our teachers. Their service to the community at this difficult time is phenomenal. And I have the belief that their work and care for our students during this pandemic will be remembered for generations. During this time, we hear many tragic stories related to health and economic hardships, but this is a moment where we can take some time to reflect on the good moments that our educators are creating for our students that they will remember for their lives. And we want to share this appreciation for our resilient teachers who are supporting our children stay connected and cared for. So thank you for all of our teachers and educators. Also, on another note, I've been attending the Corvallis Schools Foundation Board of Trustees meeting, and there are a couple of things I would like to share. One of the things that they mentioned that they're interested to connect with us regarding any potential fundraising for any shortfalls in the future. So we're going to keep the lines of communications there, and we're really appreciating their work already on the fundraising around food security. It's a work that's phenomenal. And also the other aspect, they are considering to really have some developments around executive director evaluation process to incorporate the board or the school district being involved in it. And that's something in line with other foundations. As an example, Oregon State University Foundation the university branch have some involvement in the evaluation process. So this is just in the beginnings of the discussion. I'll keep you informed if there's any developments or any updates around that. With that, any further board member reports? Seeing none, the next report is the superintendent's report.
All right, well, again, as Vince introduced, and then we've all been able to highlight and share, this is Teacher Appreciation Week. And as I reflect on it, I think a lot about how just, some of the things that I've seen on social media and some of those other places where people are saying, are showing more appreciation for teachers than they have in the past, as they sometimes wear the hat of the teacher for their kids in their house. So, I mean, I think that it has in some ways elevated the profession because people know the thought, the care, the design that goes into teaching and learning in a different way. So I know that once there was, I had heard concerns from the community about how this would start up. But once we had teachers connecting with kids, I feel like there was sort of a calmness that sort of spread throughout the community because teachers and students were connecting with one another once again. And I think that just says a lot about who our teachers are in our community and in our schools and how they connect with our kids. We have, phenomenal creative people who day in and day out are working to make connections, working to support each one of our kids, working to extend them and stretch them into new areas of learning and new exposure and new areas of interest. So, teaching is really a blessed occupation. And I think that people are seeing that now more than ever. And again, I just want to thank all of our teachers for shifting so quickly to distance learning, knowing that it wasn't going to be perfect and it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to put our heart into it and we're going to do the best we can for our kids in our community. And that alone is heroic. So I just want to say thank you to everyone and all the work that's gone into to making this change. And when we at some point come back together in our schools and in our classrooms, I know that what we've learned from this is that we will appreciate our time together more. We'll continue to appreciate the work that our teachers do for our kids and from the parent perspective, from the community perspective. And so while there are a lot of things that are put on hold in this pandemic, there's also lots of learning that can happen. And I'm just really pleased that part of that learning is how incredible our teachers are. So that's been a joy to see. I have a couple of other updates I wanted to provide tonight. One is around budget and the budget outlook. Olivia will be doing a presentation later tonight. But we know that on May 14th, the budget committee will come together and I will present the superintendent's message with the budget. The proposed budget does not include assumptions around COVID-19 impacts, but we do know that there will be significant aftershocks to the economy and to our general fund. On May 20th, we'll have a state economic forecast, which will be the next viewpoint for our overall state economy and predictors of revenue into the next school year and beyond. And also with the hope that based on those revenue forecasts that it will cause the legislature to come back into session to help to address what I see as a significant hole in the budget that's coming our way based on the pandemic. So more than anything, I just want to make sure that we are continuing to talk about that. I've identified a couple of priorities as we move into this new time regarding budget. And my two priorities are preserving school days for 2021 and maintaining a strong workforce. I know that we will have conversations and need to have conversations about those two things with a new understanding of our state budget. At the same time, those are the two priority areas that I'll continue to pursue and bring forward as we have conversations about reserves, about budget, about everything related to what happens next school year and the year beyond, because I think this is a conversation, the start of a conversation that's going to need to continue over the next couple of years. Another thing I want to highlight is social media for the good campaign. So on our CSD Facebook and Instagram pages, there are a couple of hashtags that are focusing on specific areas. Hashtag Mental Health Mondays will be an area where we talk about mental health and staff wellness. Hashtag CSD at Home will feature creative classroom projects that teachers are undertaking with their students. Hashtag We Are CSD is a theme focused on coworkers' inspiration of one another. And CSD, hashtag Pets of CSD is also there with staff members and their pets. So we want to, while we know we're away from one another, we want to be able to recognize and highlight what's going on across the district. And so those are some hashtags to pay attention to in the coming days.
That's wonderful. I want to say I'm an avid follower of hashtag Pets of CSD.
That's awesome.
Any questions for Ryan?
I've got a couple more updates.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. One more. So Wi-Fi access. We have done the Wi-Fi access, as you know, at Linus Pauling from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week as another access point for our students. We've handed out about 90 hotspots for students so they could access Wi-Fi from home. But we've also increased the number of sites, schools where Wi-Fi can be accessed. So that now includes Lincoln, Mountain View, Adams, which is between the district office and Adams School in the parking lot there. And when students come into those spots, the devices will automatically log into the district filter. So again, we're trying to create multiple opportunities for students to access Wi-Fi for their learning. Another area is our location for meal sites. We've added 2 more over the last couple of weeks. One is in the Adair at San Ann Christian. Been able to start, we knew that Adair was an area that was difficult for us to provide the meals to and for people to get into town to get meals from us. And so we've added a site there. And then also near the Woodland Hill Apartments, near the top of Woodland Hill, there's a site there as well. So we've expanded to, we now have one in Philomath at Clemens. We have one at Linus Pauling, shifting over from Garfield. We will have one at Lincoln, and we also have one at Wilson. So we now have 6 sites between Philomath and Corvallis where students can pick up meals. That includes both breakfast and lunch. And then the last thing, I always just like to highlight a department or an area. And so I just recently received data about our health navigators. As you know, we have health navigators at Garfield, at Linus Pauling, and at Lincoln. And the number of connections they've made to help families meet basic needs. In February, it was 263 connections. Then in March, it was 567. So it more than, it more than doubled in that month as we continue to identify needs for our families and access to resource. So just wanted to recognize those health navigators and what an important role they play in our school district. As you know, that's a partnership with the county where we provide half of the resources and the county provides the other half of the resources for those salaries. But it's been a really important positions for us to maintain. And so I'm just really happy to see those numbers in a time when those numbers are really needed. So those are the updates I wanted to provide tonight.
Thank you very much. Great updates. Any questions for Ryan on his updates or comments? Right, seeing none. We will go for the public and staff comments, and we don't have any public or staff comments for today's meeting. And I want to highlight the opportunity for public comment has been opened and is open through a process where people can sign up for public comments. I want to encourage anyone who would like to reach out to the school board. They still can reach out to us by email, and we welcome communication from the public at any time through email. Next item on the agenda is bond program updates. So do we have any updates about the bond?
Yes, we have a PowerPoint to share for some updates as we go into summer. So Julia's operating the PowerPoint. So we thought we would take just a few minutes today to share about what's coming up for the summer, what's underway. So Julie, if you want to go ahead and advance. Okay, at Garfield, it was a very noble undertaking. The teachers packed everything up, and we have started abatement, and we are waiting for permits to be issued so that we can start work. But we've also seen over spring break the 8 new modular classrooms set in place for next year. And it is a very exciting time, and teachers luckily are past that pack up point, and now they're focused in on distance learning and ready to see what happens for next school year. And we've got a few pictures. So Julie, if you want to reminder that this is what we have to look forward to. And in the meantime, we have seen all of this activity happening. It was a big amount of work. So we've got abatement on the right. We've got the modulars coming in, and then of course the library being packed up. So I just saw a picture of the hallway with no paneling on it, which was really exciting to see. So we didn't get that in, but it's happening. So we can continue on, Julie. At Lincoln, there's been a lot of work underway. We have our contract finalized and ready to go. The site work is beginning. Of course, as of spring break, we saw the construction fencing going up. We also have heavy equipment on site. Benton County has approved funding for the new clinic. And we just finished our last language piece on the IGA. We have 2 of them, one for the construction of the clinic and then one for the ongoing land lease. So we had both of those to work on. The tennis courts are approved to be relocated at Riverbend Park, and that was approved by City Council on May 4th. So you will see those, the intergovernmental agreement for that to come through at one of our next board meetings. So it's all underway and it's exciting work. We've also been spending a lot of time with the design team talking about value engineering, just going through all of the pieces of how we're going to build that building and really looking at, are there ways that we can cut costs? And we are right now tracking above our target for value engineering dollars. So we're saving more than we targeted. So that's a really exciting piece. And it's come with a lot of really hard work from our design and construction team. So thank you to DLR Group, Wenaha, and Fortis for all of that work. I think I've spent at least 2 hours in a meeting with that team every day this week. So it's a lot. So Julie, you want to forward? I always like to take a look at what we have coming. So we've got the view from the bus loop. No, Julie. So heavy equipment, this is a sign of the things that are going to be starting very soon. So this is exciting. You can see that we, on the top picture, we've got the equipment sitting on top of the tennis courts, and the tennis courts are actually going to be where the construction trailers sit as soon as we get approval to proceed with that. Next. So Hoover's design is complete. And one of the notes that I'll make with that is that all of the value engineering items that would apply to the Hoover project will get applied to their design as well, so that we can save money on both projects. And Fortis is under contract for the site package, but we will bid the rest of that in early summer so that we can have the full GMP. The existing modular classrooms are scheduled to be relocated this summer, and we have been able to squeeze them all in, so we won't lose a modular for the upcoming school year, which is really a benefit for the school to have access to that space. So next. Hoover view from the south. So, and from the northwest. Just those little exciting pieces to keep looking at. We don't really have photos to share of work that's currently happening. So go ahead, Julie, fine. So at Crescent Valley High School, we've had some major developments since our last time we spoke. We did proceed with hazardous material abatement to capitalize on the available space during the school closures, and that's been completed. We did then proceed with receiving bids, and unfortunately they were due on April 2nd, which was right in the middle of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, and bids came in $3 million over budget. So that was, we have spent a lot of time dissecting that. What is the implication of that $3 million over, especially with the timing of the bids? And we do believe that there was definitely some significant impacts from the COVID closure. Contractors don't know what to expect for, and by putting bids together that early in the closure, they just didn't know how to price that. And so they covered their risk by bidding high. And so we needed to make a strategy moving forward. So we know that we've applied for the seismic rehabilitation grant with the state, and the awards are scheduled to be announced any day now. But as we looked at the impact on schedule, we determined that we really needed to delay construction until 2021, which makes us all heavy-hearted. But in order to really assess how much of that overage is due to COVID and how much of it is going to need to be realigned as far as the scope in order to get us into budget, because we don't have an unlimited pot of money, we made that hard decision, and that has been communicated to the staff and our design and construction team. So the construction team that would have been working on that project this summer is being reassigned to other projects within their company, and we are going to dive in as soon as we know about the seismic grants and make a pathway forward to get us into budget. So we'll move on to Corvallis High School. We did start that roof replacement over spring break, and it's plugging along. We have some pictures of physical distancing while we do the work. The softball improvements are completed. Sadly, we didn't get to do the grand opening, ribbon cutting, but we will make sure that we celebrate that when we can. We have started the design for the CTE and other improvements. So they now have their core team developed, and we've been meeting virtually with instructors and with Paul Navarro serving as the administrator on that design team. And I will say that Pivot Architecture has really gotten creative with how to do that level of design through a virtual meeting. It's been challenging because normally we are able to put our hands on those drawings and scribble all over them, and it's much harder to do virtually, but we're having some good success and are excited to see that come to fruition. The instructors weren't so sure about it until we started seeing some pictures of some renderings of what could be, and that just, I think, sparked it, and everybody's excited to be there and participate. So, Julie? So this is a picture from the parking lot entrance at 11th Street, CHS, to see the softball field on the left. And on the right, you can see that the construction workers are keeping their distance the best they can. This picture was taken before the recommendation to wear masks came into play, but their practices are evolving with any of the CDC recommendations, but it's exciting to see that work happening. So Sheldon, we have Girding Builders under contract for phase 1 of construction. And as a reminder, that included the cafeteria, STEAM lab, and the entry improvements for the office. Staff really rose to the occasion. They came in and packed up and are making way for all of this work to happen. We had some fantastic support from Tim Trivet, who's our liaison from the maintenance department, serving as liaison to the bond. And he really came in and helped coordinate the maintenance staff, and the campus steward at that building stepped in, Levi Ferris, and got that cafeteria ready for abatement. And then the office staff came in and packed up just in a matter of days. So it was pretty fantastic to see the excitement from staff. And just as a reminder, the library renovation is part of the phase 1 construction package, but not happening until summer of 2021. So we look at some pictures of Sheldon. So this is a rendering of the library remodel, which just is fantastic. The colors, the lightness, the removal of the wood in the ceiling structure just really opens it up and livens it up. Go ahead, Julie. And this is the STEAM lab. Just a picture from the front of the STEAM lab depicting the small collaboration spaces along the right-hand side. And yeah, go ahead, Julie. So this is a picture on the left of the office space all packed up. It makes it look so small, but it's packed up and ready for construction. And on the right, we hadn't really had a chance to show you what we're doing in the office, but you can see the little square with the blue inside it. That is the vestibule. And so currently the doors are to the right and to the left to enter that vestibule. It's now going to be straight on. And we are making a check-in counter before you pass through into the interior of the office. So just to give you a little look at what that's going to look like. So Adams, Jefferson, and Wilson, we refer to as the JAWS project. We have completed schematic design, and we're working on the next phase of design, so design development. We went through estimating and we did have to go through some scaling back, but still accomplishing all the bond promises. And so we've updated the principals on that and core team members on that. And we are now preparing for our next virtual design advisory committee meeting. So our first meeting, we had all 3 schools together, and we did that at Western View Center and then broke into small groups. And we have determined that with the virtual aspect, we're going to just go ahead and break them apart and do 3 different night meetings. So that's likely to happen the end of May, beginning of June. And then we're going to hope to have 1 more in before the end of June. So 2 more design advisory committee meetings before the end of the school year. Go ahead, Jilly. Just a little sneak peek at the current designs for Adams. We have 5 additional classrooms, and we are counting the stage, which will be converted to a music room, as one of those classrooms. So in this, you'll see that we have penciled in a potential add alternate for another classroom. We know Adams is at capacity, and that being the sister school to Lincoln, we just wanted to get that up there to plan for the future. So we have the new administration suite. The current set of restrooms is going to be updated just with surfaces, but not remodeled to the new student restroom design. We couldn't fit it in within budget. And so, but the new sets of restrooms will all be their new student restroom design. So, and the same at Jefferson. Jefferson was budgeted for 4 additional classrooms. So you have the 3 that are depicted in blue, and then the music classroom, which is the stage. And same thing, you're going to see it look very similar. We're trying to standardize the administration suite. The restrooms will, same thing. We're just going to refinish those existing restrooms, and then the new restrooms will be the new design. And Wilson was budgeted for 3 classrooms. And so again, you'll see the 2 classrooms in art science, a standard classroom, and then the music classroom on the stage. And to wrap us up, I wanted to give you some quick updates on non-bond funded projects. So the secure vestibules at the high schools are underway and are scheduled for completion this summer. With no students in the building and interruptions to the supply chain, we're just sure, well, it's going a little slower than originally anticipated, but they will definitely be done when students return. The district is contracted with Convergent Technologies. So we've been looking at a new security management software, and that would be to integrate video surveillance, access controls, and intrusion detection. So we are under contract with them, and we are going to start by setting up the softwares at the servers at the district office and getting that all set up and ready to go for our first projects. And then due to current budget considerations, we are evaluating options for the CV tennis courts. It is a big project, and it's not a bond promise. We know that it's something that's passionate, but we need to really be looking at our funds and how to best allocate them. So we're exploring options. And that is the end of the slide deck. So now is the chance for questions.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciated. Thank you for the update. Do we have any questions from board members? Vince, and then Sarah, and then Lou. Vince,
so thanks for all the pictures. I wish there was more. We don't get to get into the buildings, but I'm particularly excited. Thank you for sharing that floor plan for the Sheldon Lynn office and that entryway. That's really helpful for conceptualizing that.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the delay in construction at CV, and I'm just curious how is that going to impact other projects in the, in the bond promise. And then I have some concerns, and I know it's really preliminary and we don't know much, but I have some concerns about cost inflation due to the delay. So if you can speak to those, I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now.
So we definitely looked at the timeline when we talked about this postponement, and the summer of 21 construction is actually a lighter construction season than this one is.
Okay.
And so we think that it's actually not going to be hugely detrimental in terms of timing and the amount of work in the market. So that's one piece. As far as inflation, that's a crystal ball item that we definitely have talked about. So what we know is that contractors really needed to pad the risk into their bids. And so we are hopeful that we aren't going to see inflation that is going to offset the cost that we will see, or cost benefit for having a more favorable bid season. We're talking about strategies on how to really narrow in on what is the budget going to be when we move into that bidding cycle for this construction in 21. So one of the concerns we had with being that much over budget, besides the fact that we don't have that much money available to spend, is that that was not for the full package. We had not included all the seismic work in this package. We did have an allowance set aside, and that played into that $3 million overage. However, by not knowing what the outcome of the seismic grant and what, if we did not get the grant, how we would fulfill the bond promise related to the seismic promise, we needed to be able to factor that all in. And the other piece is that by postponing it and really diving into procurement strategies, then we can have a better idea what the overall bond budget is going to be looking like also. So how do we think about those bond reserves? And so this $3 million, I remember we talked about an allocation of bond reserves that the bond leadership team has recommended. That $3 million is above the allocation of some of the bond reserves. So we just had to really take that step back. And what we know about recession is that recession could show us a de-escalation in prices. But we also have some risk associated with that, because as we pull out of the recession, we need to make sure that we have a good pool of contractors still available to us. So we did a lot of vetting of pulling in all of our resources. Dave Fischel has spent a lot of his time recently just evaluating the impacts of COVID-19 on the construction industry. And he and Dale have been very closely working on that and keeping me in the loop on it, working with our contractors also. So at this point, our best estimate is that, and direction was to take the risk of postponing construction with the anticipation that if we see an inflation, we still will need to still get us back in budget. And so I hope that answered your question, Vince.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for all the deep thought on how to proceed with that and all your diligent work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Up next, Sarah, and then Lou, and then Jay. Sarah, go for it.
Yeah, so my first question was very similar to Vince's question. And then I was also wondering if there are other projects that we see being delayed, and just the impact of the adjustments that have to be made for distancing, the supply chains, and other considerations around COVID on the timing and ability to get our projects done, and then how that could possibly impact our overall budget.
Right. So Garfield and Sheldon and Lincoln all bid out before the COVID-19 impacts really hit. So one of the things that we also spent time on was just talking about the unexpected that could come up from COVID. And that's really hard to plan for or to have foresight with, but really working out all of the contract language with our contractors, with Fortis and Girding. So we anticipate that Sheldon and Garfield will be running on schedule, as do we plan that for Lincoln. However, we're always going to plan for a contingency. So some of the things we're thinking about, I'll talk about Garfield specifically, is we don't want to get underway with construction in any area that if there was a huge postponement that we wouldn't be ready for school in this fall. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. As far as Hoover, I think that's going to be a very telling bid. It's going to be bid the rest of the package in early summer. And so we're going to be taking some cues off of that to see what's happening with the market as we start to open the economy back up, and just seeing how hungry the contractors are for the work and what they're anticipating as far as supply chain disruptions. Certainly a piece of equipment, I think I might have shared this at a previous meeting, but an 8-week lead time piece of equipment is now being estimated at 21 weeks. And that is a huge, that's just contractors not knowing and throwing a number at it. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to mitigate and make sure that if that comes to fruition, that we're just ready for school to start. Because that's the main thing, is that we need to have spaces that kids can come and learn if the circumstances lend it to that with a COVID impact. So we anticipate that right now CV is the only time constraint. As far as the budget and what the overall bond budget impact will be, that's yet to be seen. Certainly we could see additional costs from any of our projects depending on how things line out. But we are, from a construction team perspective, anticipating and planning for a potential closure next school year for a potential shutdown for construction. So we're trying to plan our schedules accordingly. And if it doesn't happen, then we've got that benefit of added time, but we're trying to take a cautious approach.
Brian?
One thing I just wanted to add was recognition of the Garfield staff. As we think about the timing of all of this, we knew.
Oh, no.
I wanted to say muted.
No, he's talking through my iPad.
Oh, sorry. That we were able to that we were able to use every day that was possible. So once school closed on March 13th, the Garfield staff went in and started to pick up their materials, pack up their classrooms, which was a huge lift for them. At the same time, they were starting distance learning. And so we know that added stress, and we continue to provide the support we could. But really, it goes out thank you. It goes up to the Garfield staff for making that happen. The office staff is now working out of the T building at CHS and H building, and then staff came in and picked up all the materials and packed everything up. So again, we did it early because we knew that it created more time in anticipation of what was the timelines may look like in getting kids back into school successfully in the fall. So every sort of aspect where we can make some adjustments now, we're trying to do that because we know that will help to support a more realistic timeline with all of these questions about supply chain.
Wonderful.
Dale, did you have something to add to that?
My only comment was a bit of optimism on Hoover. I'm feeling like it ought to go okay. There's a lot of subcontractors on the Lincoln job that we want to also get the Hoover job for their own efficiencies, and that's likely to help costs. And Fortis has also already started marketing the job pretty heavily to the industry, and they're getting good response. So my feeling is that the CVHS project suffered a lot because of its bid date, right when things were still fresh with the COVID outbreak. And I think the industry seems to be recovering from that and figuring out ways to execute work safely now. So,
right. Lou and then Jay. Lou, go for it.
I just had more of a question about where people can find documents of what's going on at the schools, like what the future of them looks like. So the reason I asked is because I live really super right next to Lincoln, and it's hard to find anything about what's going on there except for just seeing what's going on, if that makes sense for people that live in the area. And it's just a curiosity point, I think, that people will start having, especially as stuff continues to happen that isn't as expected, like the whole house shaking today. I was kids that were not in session because of the equipment, the impact on the surrounding area. So it was just something that came up for me, that it was I'm sure that there's other people that may live right next to Lincoln too, that or the other schools too, that are going to be having those really intensive digs and stuff going on that are I wonder what's going to happen there. Is there somewhere that it's going to be on the webpage? Because I couldn't find it on the bond page at all.
Okay, so the bond page is definitely where I was going to refer you to, but also to say that next week we are working on sending out communications to the neighborhood associations just with updates and who to call if there's a question, that kind of information. Also, I don't know that it's been installed yet, but we have a sign that is going to actually two or three signs that'll be posted on the construction fencing at each of the schools that just shows what's coming. Although that doesn't help with knowing that there's going to be major earthwork happening and you might feel the earth move under your feet. So let me do some evaluating of the website and see what we can do to update to make sure there's current information on that. Dale?
Kim, I'd add, there's a new communication tool that Fortis is developing, and it looks like a pretty useful single-page graphical representation. It kind of says, here's what's coming up this week and next week. So I think that will become a standard communication tool. We're still fine-tuning it, working with Brenda a little bit on how to push that out.
Cool, thanks. It wasn't like a major budget question or anything. It was just like thinking about the other impacts of the construction in the neighborhoods and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Good question. Jay, you're up next, and we have 5 more minutes for this.
Just to kind of tie in with the Oversight Committee that I was going to use as a reporting time instead of my prior report. 2 things that hit me. One is the COVID adaptation, I guess is a better way to say that Kim is reporting, and people are being very careful around each other, and that's kind of a minor thing, but kind of a major thing, and it's real reassuring. The report we got, and obviously they've had to adjust on a almost probably weekly basis to new guidelines. So thank you for that big safety part. And the other part is the money, and the committee looked really hard at budgets, and I think that's one of our big focuses is, are we staying within budget and so on. And I just want to again thank Kim and Dale and the work you're doing, including the fact that you say it's a good idea to stop and wait a year on Crescent Valley or think about that tennis court. Those are all tough calls, and yet I think we're doing the right thing, and you hope that by making the pauses that things will get better. But I guess the report is we're being very fiscally responsible, and people love to hear that and can be reassured. So thanks for that good work. Those are my only comments.
Wonderful. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you. I really appreciate the good work that you're putting in, and it's really great to see those developments and updates, and appreciate it. So thanks, Dale and Kim. Next up is the social studies curriculum. And basically, we do have Marciana and Nikki here, and we received a very good updates document. So thank you so much for the documents, and I'll leave it up to you if you have a presentation.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Nikki, are you there?
I am here, yes.
We're a team. I really miss sitting next to you in the boardroom.
I know.
So we'll do this virtually. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to the school board. This evening, we've been looking forward to for the last couple of years. And before we jump into our your Q&A, Nikki and I felt it was important just to share a couple of visuals with you and talk a little bit about our process. Because during this particular adoption, we really undertook a different perspective and a different, we took a different journey, to say the least. And so before we do that, I just wanted to say a few words before we jump into the presentation. So our racial equity work has accelerated over the last 7 years as we began intentional work training our staff, using the equity lens to make decisions, and the adoption of an equity educational policy. In 2018, when the social studies adoption process was initiated, we knew we needed to engage in this adoption differently and more courageously. So typically a traditional adoption usually takes about a year, a typical adoption process, but we wanted to have integrity in our equity work and ensure that our beliefs and our values matched our actions. So we know that you have had an opportunity to read the report, but we just wanted to share a few visuals with you to kind of share the process and the journey that we have undertaken in the last couple of years. So Nikki, do you mind going to the next slide?
Julie's got it.
So Julie. Thank you. So our social studies adoption really began with the courageous leadership of our Delta group and our safe students. So in this picture, you see Angel Harris and Denise Tuffan Hughes, who led us through a lesson. This was back 2 years ago. And the lesson that they were teaching, that we were talking about that evening, was on Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall was the first African-American to hold a position in the Supreme Court. Their essential message that night, and you can see families and community members there, was that Black history should not be relegated to 1 month, but instead should be part of every month and in every content area. And this night really was pivotal to us as we engaged in our 2-year process. Next slide, Julie. So in this slide, again, this was during that same evening, we actually took the textbooks that we had at the time, and you see parents and students sitting alongside our exec team. You see Ryan there and Rinda and Olivia in the back. And as we were looking at the materials and really analyzing them, we noticed the lack of multiple perspectives, and the narratives in the books that we had at the time really showed a lack of, and actually were absent and portrayed our African-American, Indigenous, and Latinx people in a negative light. And so from that meeting, we created equity look-fors that were created when looking at materials that built on the funds of knowledge of our diverse community. Next slide. And here at that same evening, we had some of our safe students looking at materials. Next slide, please. And before we looked at materials, we provided, and here you see our social studies teachers from both of our 3 middle schools. And we provided them multiple opportunities for teachers to collaborate, keeping in mind the new social studies standards that emphasize multicultural standards. And based on this foundational work, rubrics were created to look at materials that emphasize multiple perspectives, community voice, and we wanted to have materials that were fully bilingual. Next slide. Community and student voice and perspectives have been central to this work. And here in this slide is our Kiva panel. And the purpose of our Kiva panel was to surface and test collective knowledge and understandings. And this adoption process, and we'll talk about this in just a second, has set the stage for future adoptions. We've seen that the involvement of the community is critical, involvement of students is critical, and how we engage in professional learning has to shift. And we also have seen that partnering with our Delta and SAFE and the broader community of partners in this process is pivotal to our work. And in our last picture, you'll see this is the reason we're doing this work. As we look at our students, our SAFE students, it's important to remember that we are wanting for our students to be critical thinkers and to be racially conscious. And so this is why we do this work. So now Nikki and I would like to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? We have Vince and then Lou.
Oh, let Lou go first. Mine is a technical question.
All right, Lou, go for it.
Yeah, I just had a question about how the curriculum, because there's so much in the program. I forget what it's called right now. I apologize. The TCI, is that what it is? Mm-hmm. There's so much for teachers to choose from. And some of the stuff that I've seen was super problematic with Native American depictions, and even some of like the Civil War era stuff that promoted like embodying soldiers and doing a music video about settler impacts on Nez Perce people and other tribes. And so it creates a situation where students may unknowingly replicate harm within the classroom. And I was just curious how the teachers are going to be deciding what pieces of the curriculum to implement and which ones not, because there's so much, and how the training is going to be for teachers to narrow it down to maybe not include some of those ones that may end up replicating harm within the classroom unintentionally. And so that's kind of where my question was based on, just seeing it. And also, I know you all worked so hard on this, and so please don't take it the wrong way, but the time frame for feedback was really bad too. It was like during the end of April, in the midst of all the COVID stuff. And I know that things have to happen at certain time periods, but there wasn't a reminder sent. And so there was like a lot of concern I have with if people were able, kind of wanted to know how much community feedback you got. And I don't remember if that was in the report, and I apologize if it was, but those are my just two questions.
Marcy, and I can talk to both of those. I would agree with you that the timing was short, and we had planned to get the materials up sooner. And then schools were closed in the week that we were going to meet and make our decisions with teachers. And so I think the window was short, and we didn't get a lot of community feedback through the forms. We did get some through phone calls and through emails directly. And I think one of the most valuable pieces of feedback we did get was from the students. So we had a survey that students took in all grade levels after they kind of experienced each one, and we disaggregated that data by race and did see some differences, and really drew the attention to the teacher's attention to that data to say, here's how white students experienced this, and then here's how students of color experienced it. And so I think having that voice made, for me, I think it made me feel like we were going in the right direction. And then speaking to TCI, we had similar concerns shared from Jason Dorsett and Angel and Jody regarding the way that the Black story in America is told. I think the positive news based on their feedback, I don't know if it's positive news, but we only adopted TCI for grades 6 and 7, and grade 8 is where United States history and American history are taught. So grade 8 and grade 11, and we didn't adopt TCI. And largely that came because the teachers provided feedback that said, this is a really white perspective, and it doesn't tell the story of Blacks, for example, beyond the story of slavery. And there were several quotes that I can maybe share later that told us a lot about the teachers' racial equity journey. And then also the teachers in grade 8 said, hey, there's some other supplemental texts that we'd like to kind of review over the summer, not as an adoption, but as supporting texts. And one of those is the Indigenous people's history. And so I feel like their thinking is in the right place. And I also feel like we have a lot of work still to do with staff on how to select materials and then use those materials in ways that don't harm our kids.
Thanks. The other part was like in the info you sent to us all, you said that the curriculum would support Senate Bill 13 requirements, and I wasn't able to log on to it to look for things specifically, but the stuff that I did look at didn't look like it had anything to do with Senate Bill 13 curriculum. So I was kind of curious how it would support the SB 13.
Yeah, so Newsella actually did a workshop with some of the Oregon districts that have gone with them for the adoption to look at their materials, and then also look at the state's tribal history, shared history curricula, and see how those can go together. So they're saying, hey, we know that the state has resources, and we want to work with each district to make sure that we're supporting you with materials that work for you and in your community. I feel like that is actually one of the strengths of that curriculum in particular, is I can reach out to the people we've been working with, and they're always saying, oh, try this. Oh, let us look for this. We're going to source this. We want to partner with you. Additionally, Marcianne and myself and Amy Leeson, who supports our elementary schools, all signed up to become trainers of that state curriculum. And that, of course, the first training was, I think, Thursday, March 13th. So right when the state was shutting down and canceled. So with that, I think is ongoing work, both with ODE the state curriculum, and then also we have work to do with our teachers. And we'd love, I've been saying, to Angel and Jason and Jody, like future collaboration into next year as we implement, I think will be a real key to our success.
All right, thank you. Part of the reason I was asking specifically about Senate Bill 13 is sometimes what happens, like, I don't want to see what happened last time the tribes developed curriculum where it was viewed as like optional when the tribes specifically made that for Oregon schools. And then teachers chose material that wasn't from the tribes in place of it. And so that's kind of why I was like, wanted to directly ask how the Nusela curriculum actually like met Senate Bill 13. So it would be a complementary to the actual curriculum. Okay, thank you. That makes feel a lot better, because yeah, that was sad when that happened with their last iteration of curriculum they developed for the state. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking your questions.
Great questions, Laura. Thank you. Vince?
So my technical question. So you shared in your report that this is an independent curriculum adoption, that the curricula that we're going to, or we're seeking to adopt tonight, aren't on the state list. And so I'm not familiar with the independent materials evaluation tool or the process. Can you just talk about process so that I can understand, how we're going to go through this? If you get a positive vote from us tonight, what's the next steps?
So a lot of it is some paperwork that honestly we keep on file in the district office that says that the curriculum meets the same kind of standards that are set by the state, and that the state reviews when they get a curriculum to be considered to be on the state list. And I thought about, Marciana and I both talked about why we didn't go with the state curriculum. And it really, came down to looking for something different that offered counter stories, multiple perspectives, and was representative of our students. And a lot of the more standard type of materials that you would, that many of us probably experienced, just didn't fit that bill. And so we started looking at different kinds of materials. As Marciana shared too, we also really wanted materials that were available in Spanish. So those two things became drivers for us. And it was kind of like, we wanted to get the best materials in our hands. And then we were like, okay, now if we're doing an independent adoption, what do we need to do? And it's some paperwork, and we're partnering with some of the other districts that have gone with these adoptions to complete that work.
And one thing I'd add is that typically those decisions are made based on resource and finance. To get on the state list, there's costs associated with it, with the caravan and having materials out. So it's not necessarily that means it has an increased vetting by the state as much as it has a large conglomerate behind it.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Jay, go for it.
This is obviously a pretty near and dear topic to an old history teacher that's watching history student teachers in Corvallis schools. I really like what you've done. I like your priorities, the ability to say we highlight different perspectives, and you throw a Zen book in that's clearly a different perspective than a traditional book, but we need to have kids thinking from all different ways. And that goes both ways, not, thinking from all different backgrounds. And then I also appreciate both Native American and Black history. So I'm excited. I do not know what Nusela looks like. I know that what history teachers at the high school and middle school level, they tend to not love big bulky textbooks, but they like to use units from those. And then your point about emphasizing critical thinking, multiple perspective, active participation in politics, those are music to my ears. So I'm hopeful. I don't understand exactly a cost, and maybe you could comment down the road, where does this run a budget issue for us, or to what level? But I just compliment you. And I know it's not easy to get people, especially teachers, to come to a lot of gatherings and so on. So thank you for getting them deeply involved.
Thank you. Sarah and then Lou. Sarah, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. I wanted to comment that when Ryan was talking about goals and having, thinking about real world learning for our kids and relevance, having a curriculum that teaches from multiple perspectives and it involves more critical thinking around that, I think goes a long way for making things like the study of history seem more relevant, because you're not just sort of getting the one sort of cookie cutter point of view. So I really appreciate that for multiple reasons, but I think we can also point to several of our goals, our equity goals and racial inclusion goals and our real world learning goals are all potentially going to be moved forward by this adoption. So I was really pleased to see the focus on the inclusion of viewpoints and thinking.
Agreed. Lou.
I was just gonna add in addition to the critical thinking parts that Jay pointed out, which is like super awesome, that there was, I don't remember if it was in your handout or if it was on their webpage. I think it might've been in the handout that there was an opportunity to have some of the historicized info linked to current day. And I think that's a really exciting way for students to get excited about history. I know I used excited twice in that sentence, but I really like that linking of like history as part of our lived experiences now, and showing different views on history at the same time as showing those links to now, I think will really impact students in a positive way too.
I think that was like one of the strengths that I saw just looking through some of the units. It's like they didn't just talk about voting. For example, it starts with the 15th Amendment, perspectives of different groups that had to fight for voter rights, then goes into the 1965 Voter Act, then goes into voter registration, it goes into poll taxing, and then talks about how to register to vote as a teen, and then finally makes connections already to the 2020 election. And I think it's such a strength that you can take something like voting, which has a long history, and bring it right up into the present day for kids. I think I was excited to see that, and I could see kids going, okay, this matters. I'm not just learning about something that's totally irrelevant to me.
Yeah. So I do think there's a lot of exciting parts to it. I just want us to be like also leery of it because how much material is in there for people to choose from, teachers to choose from, and so always keeping an eye on those unintended parts of it that can easily pop out, because we want to make sure all of our students in the district are not feeling like they don't belong in the classroom because of the curriculum. And so I appreciate you all trying to shift away from some of the really white-centered histories that have been dominating education this entire time, and bringing the other perspectives in as well.
And one of the things, and thank you so much for that, Lou, and one of the things that we've been really striving for is culturally responsive teaching practices. And, before the crisis happened, we'd had the opportunity to do a lot of care walks in the classrooms, and really helping build capacity of our teachers, and really ensuring that students can see themselves and that they're represented in their classrooms, that they can find books in their libraries that show multiple perspectives. So as we move forward, it's one thing having materials in students' hand, but it's another is how is it taught, and how can we make sure that it's rigorous and relevant, and that along the way that relationships are being built with students, and that students can truly be themselves in the classroom. And so I think that really points to the kind of the next step in our adoption is how do we support teachers in teaching these materials in a very culturally responsive way.
Wonderful.
One thing I'd like to add is just appreciation for Nikki and Marcianne and Colleen at CHS for the work it took to put this adoption together. Oftentimes it's a years-long project. This was too, because we started way back. We didn't start with the curriculum. We started with intention and discourse, and that we are looking at this through an equity lens. And so it takes more time, but it's time well spent. And at the same time, we know that we're sort of on the cusp of budget challenges, but we've spent 2 years working towards this. And it's also a curriculum that is not exorbitantly expensive. And so I still feel like it's something that we should put into place now based on the commitment of everybody to this point. So getting sort of back to what kind of reading between the lines of Jay's question, I think that that's where we are right now. And I think it's an important move for us to make.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's go for a question with Vince, and we're approaching the end of the time for the discussion on this.
So I have one last question, then I would love to make a motion. So what is the cost for the curriculum adoption, both initially, and it sounds like there's going to be a relationship with some of these publishers ongoing. So what would be the ongoing cost as well?
So Newsela is an annual subscription, and they offer a variety of packages. Like, you can just buy the Oregon collection and just pay for just the social studies curriculum for grades 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12. And honestly, we looked at the teaching and learning department, looked a little longer down the road. And I think knowing that our budget is going to be tight, we are choosing, at least for Newsela, to spend a little bit more to get a K-12 offering for teachers.
You muted. You muted.
I didn't touch anything. I don't have so we opted to spend a little bit more so we could get science, language arts, and social studies K-12. So we had other adoptions planned for next year and materials that were needed in science and social studies at the elementary level. So by paying a bit more for Newsela, we can actually offer this resource K-12, but still get an Oregon collection that's social studies focused. And so the total cost of that package is $103,000. And then there are annual costs. And if you commit to a multi-year, you get discounts. Okay. They have been like, I think the thing that has worked for us is like how responsive they've been to Marciana and I's questions and to teachers' questions, and adaptable, and they want to improve and they want feedback. And they want to make it so that it works for us. So.
Great, thank you.
Beautiful. So yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the thoughtful work that you've done, and I really want to thank you on including me within the process to speak with the teachers. It was really good discussion. Since we approached the time, I would say the reports in our packets contains a requested motion. If you plan to propose wording other than what was provided, please write out your motion in its entirety before reading it aloud. Does anyone wish to make a motion? And I'll assume, Vince, your hand is still up.
Yeah, I'm very eager to make this motion and have a couple comments here. So may it please the chair, I move to adopt the TCI History Alive Middle School curriculum as a primary resource for grades 6 and 7, and adopt Newsela Oregon Collections as a secondary resource for grades 6 and 7, and adopt Newsela Oregon Collections as a primary resource for grades 8 through 12.
Second.
And I heard the second from Therese, correct?
Yes.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded by Vincent, seconded by Therese. Is there any further discussion?
Yes.
Vince, go ahead.
So I really want to express my appreciation for this adoption. Nikki, Marcianne, and all the staff that have supported this, thank you for the last 2 years of work. As a person who has walked with the district over the last 7 years, this is really actualizing for me to see us move into this space and see the tremendously inclusive process that you've employed here. I was really shocked to realize that our current social studies curriculum is 11 years old. And I went back and thought, that would be 2009, right? Well, Obama was inaugurated in 2009 for his first term. And we probably all remember who George W. Bush was. We were just coming out of the Great Recession in 2009. And I think about all that's changed in the United States since 2009, how much has changed in Oregon and in our community. It is high time for us to adopt this curriculum. I'm just really grateful to staff for the diligent work and for bringing us this curriculum. And I realize that maybe it's not perfect. It's not what we would like to have, but it's what we need. And it's what we need right now. And just thank you for doing your best to bring it to us so we can adopt. And I'm looking forward to voting yes on the motion.
Thank you, Vince. Any further discussion from board members? I would like to add a few things here. I want to ditto what Vince mentioned. 11 years, it's time for a new curriculum, and there is work that we need to do to always make sure that we're addressing the social learning needs for our students. Some of the things that I'm really excited about is that the systems thinking is incorporated throughout the TCI lesson cycle, making connections and understand relationships of ideas and events from multiple perspectives is something really important for the citizen of the future. And that's something that we need to make sure is available in our curriculum when our students learn social studies. Promoting systems thinking by connecting historical events to current events and that are relevant to their lives. You mentioned voting, and that's a real world learning in action that aims to teach social studies events and ideas and actions that are not isolated from reality. So I really want to thank everyone who worked on this work and for your diligent process around it. And as you mentioned, it's a work in progress. By voting on this curriculum, that does not mean that we're not going to continue to improve our work and collaborate with the community partners. And that's very essential and important. So any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I would like to restate the motion. It's been moved by Director Vince Adams and seconded by Director Therese Jones to adopt the TCI History Alive middle school curriculum as a primary resource for grades 6 and 7, adopts Newsela Oregon collections as a second resource for grades 6 and 7, and adopt Newsela Oregon collections as a primary resource for grades 8 and 12. And for that, I would like to ask all those in the affirmative to say aye.
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 Anyone? Listen, how about we do a roll call?
Okay.
We'll do a roll call to Director Jay Conroy.
Aye.
Director Sarah Finger McDonald.
Aye.
Director Luhoy White Bear.
Aye.
Director Vince Adams.
Aye.
Director Therese Jones.
Aye.
And did I miss anyone? Okay, and I vote aye, and it's been passed unanimous. Passes. Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Sammy, will you entertain one more point on this topic?
Absolutely.
So I'd like to request that next year we have a couple check-ins on the rollout of this curriculum. I think that there's some components of it where you know, I think staff and board alike are have some concern about what it's going to look like, and particularly because we're not going to be able, it sounds like we're not going to be able to spend on professional development like we would like. I'd like to know how our educators are being supported in the rollout for the curriculum, and of course SB 13 integration. So those would be topics. Maybe something at the middle of the school year and at the end would be nice. Thank you.
Certainly noted. So I'll bring this up for the board leadership, and we'll see how we can incorporate that in updates or future board discussions. Thank you very much, Vince, and thank you very much, Marcian and Nikki and Colleen, the whole team, for your work. Appreciated. Up next, we have the budget update, and we have Olivia here.
And Julie just pulling up the presentation. Oh, Olivia's gonna run it.
I can't share my screen.
Okay. I'm gonna make you a co-host real quick. See if that works.
Give it a
Got
try.
it. Yep.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm just, do you like my crystal ball?
I
Just
love
gonna
the
give a kind of a quick and dirty check-in on sort of our current state of affairs with financials, and then talking a little bit about what to expect in the next couple of months. I just want to preface kind of something similar to what Ryan said in his superintendent's update earlier today, that most of the information that we will need to know to really change anything for next year, we're not going to have anytime soon. And we will likely be adopting a budget that is based on assumptions that don't include any type of reduction. And it's pretty unlikely that we'll have any information that's different than what we have now when we have our budget meetings. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm sure that along the way, you'll probably have some questions, and I bet that your questions are very similar to the questions that we have as well. So,
and one thing just to add to that is that that's also been the recommendation from all of the organizations that we're a part of to build the budget based on that 9 billion and understand that that's not necessarily where we're going to end up. So that's not something that's unique to us. It's something that is being done sort of across the state.
yeah, so kind of just doing a check-in on some information that's been shared with the board, with our leadership team, with our associations, just kind of so we're all coming from the same place when we're talking about what our current state of affairs is. And when we look at student enrollment over the last 5 years, knowing that student enrollment is a primary driver in our revenue, especially from the state resources, our total number of students enrolled has really only increased by 33 students in the last 5 years. So very little to no increase at all, pretty much. We know that Muddy Creek enrollment caps were increased over the last couple of years. So in reality, most of the change in enrollment is attributed to that. Looking at staffing, levels of staffing, full-time equivalent positions over the last 5 years has increased by 126 FTE. So we've increased our staffing levels by 18%. So obviously what that means is that our student teacher ratios are less than they used to be. And our spending per student is quite a bit more than what it used to be. And this inverse relationship is something that we know kind of has to stop at this point. And so just kind of making it really clear when we're talking about our current year, we know that we're spending more than what we're bringing in. And if you look at the bars in this chart, the darker green is our revenues, the lighter green is our expenditures. And over the last 5 years, our general fund revenues have increased 27%, but our general fund expenditures have increased 39%. So we've definitely been responding to a lot of student need and school level requests. I think we've done a really great job of supporting our schools and our students in ways that we weren't doing 5 years ago. And so now we're just going to need to re-examine what we're doing and start to really align more of our spending with our priorities. Just kind of a check-in on the current year general fund financial. This probably isn't new news, but just kind of going over, what our adopted budget looked like for the general fund and what our new budget or our new projection looks like essentially. So we know that our revenues are less than what we had assumed. That's primarily due to a decline in student enrollment. So when we projected enrollment and when we looked at what actual enrollment was, less students than what we had anticipated. We also saw like a no change in our local option tax revenue this year, which was not anticipated as well. We saw more compression on our local option tax than what we had been anticipating. And when it came to spending, the majority of the change between the adopted budget and our new projection has to do with the results of collective bargaining. We were bargaining with all of our employee groups at the time the budget was developed. And so the results of bargaining were costed more than what we had planned. We also entered into a new charter school contract that had some financial implications as well. And we're passing through a higher percentage of state revenue to our charter school. And so those are the two big drivers on the financial side. So again, looking just at the current year, we're spending about $4.9 million more than what we're bringing in. And so kind of using that as the basis as we move forward, what we know is that there will be an economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe it will significantly reduce projected revenue in the final year of the biennium at the state level. So the state adopts a biennial budget, the district adopts an annual budget. So knowing that there will be a significant reduction in the biennial revenue, what it means is that when that reduction is applied to the state school fund, we have to absorb the reduction in 1 year of the 2-year biennium. And so when there's a state school fund reduction after year 1, the whole entire impact happens in year 2. So it will be disproportionately impacted. And kind of looking at some of the models that have been distributed by the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, I think there's no disputing. We are in a recession as we speak, and we've had a severe drop. I think there's a lot of assumption that once things start to open up, we will see a pretty immediate increase. It won't be back to the level that it was before. I think where the real question lies is how long will it take to get back to that level that we were before? And so that is kind of the real tough question to answer that nobody really has any idea. And it's too early really to even predict at this point. And so what we know is that, there's been a big drop. We anticipate it'll get a little bit better, but we just don't know how long this will last. So I'm going to cover a lot of different kind of topics here because there's a lot of moving parts. And when it comes to our budget, we get funds from different sources. And I want to talk about sort of all the things that are in play right now. We're going to talk about the state revenue shortfall. So that's the state school fund. We're going to talk about student investment account, which is tied to the Student Success Act. We're going to talk about federal stimulus funds that the district has been allocated recently. We're going to talk about the state reserves, our district reserves, and then kind of just a general conversation about what general fund reductions may look like. And so starting with the state revenue shortfall, we know that the current biennial budget for the state school fund is $9 billion. And we know that 49% of that was distributed in year 1 and 52% of that is scheduled to be distributed in year 2. The majority of the state school fund is made up of general fund dollars, state general fund dollars, and a portion of it is made up of other state funds, primarily from lottery revenue, marijuana tax revenue, and corporate activity tax revenue. And so what we do know is that a few weeks ago, the governor had kind of given a directive at the state level to look at the anything that's funded with state general fund dollars to plan for an 8.5% reduction. And so, like I said, when we look at an 8.5% reduction of the portion of the state school fund that is general fund, knowing that it's really only able to be reduced in the second year, it's a significant reduction. It's like, 17% reduction. And so just to try to give like a range of, well, what does that really mean? Starting at the bottom, 8.5%. So if the governor is saying across the board reduction, 8.5% of state general fund goes away, For our district, the state school fund allocation would be reduced by $7.1 million. And then kind of looking at scenarios that shrink that reduction down. So if the state, so if the legislature were to convene and decide that they wanted to change the across the board reduction, and maybe it looks different for K-12 than it maybe it does for fish and wildlife, or maybe it looks different for this. So the legislature does have the ability to sort of apply the reduction in different ways. The governor only has the ability to do across the board reductions. So these other scenarios would be in the case of legislative action or deployment of state level reserves. But in general, even with a smaller reduction of 4.5% or 6.5%, we're still talking multi-million dollar reductions to the district. Looking at the student investment account for the 2021 school year, this is what our budget's based on. Our proposed budget will be based on in the estimate that we received from ODE in late winter. So our allocation, estimated allocation, was $5.4 million. It's about 1% of the estimated funds available across the state. And really, we're looking at this in 25% chunks. So we know that first quarter has already come and gone with calendar year 2020. And we know that corporate activity taxes are not coming in at the level that was originally predicted, which is what our estimate was based off of. So this is a tricky one because this one we don't really know a lot about what the reduction may look like. So if it was 25% less, $1.4 million, 50% less, 2.7, 75% less, 4.1. I don't think we're going to see anything less than a 50% reduction in this area. I think this one's going to be pretty significant. On a positive note, we have been allocated some federal stimulus funds through the CARES Act, through a fund specifically for public education. Those funds were allocated in the same way that Title I is allocated to schools. We know that the allowable use is broad, so it shouldn't be hard for us to use the funds. And we can use the funds to backfill existing expenses, which isn't always the case with federal funds. Oregon received about $121 million, and our allocation was about $725,000. So it's great. It will allow us to keep some things intact, but that number is pretty small when you think about the numbers we just saw on the last two slides. Okay, so this chart is from the March 2020 Economic and Revenue Forecast. We're going to talk about the May forecast kind of later in the presentation, but this is the most recent update in terms of state reserves. So a couple of observations in this. We know that in 07, 09, 09, 2011, during the last significant recession, I have a couple observations. One, the level of state reserves was much smaller than it is right now. So that's a positive thing. You can see that in 09, 11 biennium, the reserves that were there just all of a sudden were gone. There was no education stability funds left. Everything was used, it was all gone very quickly. And so that's what made that 09, 2011 biennium pretty painful for public schools in Oregon. The good news is that reserves have been built up. They're in a pretty good place. And what's really good is that from a public education perspective, there is a fund and it's only for use from that perspective. So the state has a significant level of reserves, but there is a portion that is only able to be allocated to education. So that's kind of that question of, we anticipate that the pandemic will have a negative impact on revenues, but we don't really have any clue in terms of how much reserves would be allocated, when they would be allocated, for how long they would be allocated. So those are the questions that are going to come up if and when the legislature convenes a special session. So looking at our own district reserves, again, we have a pretty solid board policy that requires a certain level of reserves. So there's kind of two overlays on this chart. One is just to represent the change in reserve levels over the last few years, including the projection for the end of this current fiscal year. And then you can kind of see that there's a yellow line that represents the 12.5% of the 3 reserve funds combined that are required by their board policy. And you can kind of see what our actual percentage has been. So we've been able to maintain our reserves above the policy level for the last 5 years. We expect that we'll end the year slightly above the policy level as well. We know that we had quite a bit set aside prior to this year to offset the big impact that the PERS employer contribution rate that went into effect on July 1 of 2019. So we're using a lot of our, what I would say like our surplus reserves right now to offset our operating deficit in the current fiscal year. And then I would just say, so the rainy day fund is outlined in the board policy. You know, it requires board action to utilize any of those funds, but I'm just kind of pointing it out that rainy day fund is like our own equivalent of the state's education stability fund. So keep in mind that when we're kind of looking at the big picture, we're also looking at that rainy day fund as a possible source of funding that could be utilized over the next couple of years.
One thing I'd say about that is that we also had anticipated that the student investment account and that helping us to maintain programming for next year. So while that was spending down every dollars above that required board policy level of reserves, it was also with anticipation that we were bringing people on and enhancing programs while we knew there was going to be other districts looking for similar opportunities in the upcoming year. So we were our intent was to be proactive and adding programs and supports for kids.
Okay, so sort of taking everything all together, this looks at federal stimulus money coming in. This looks at different scenarios of state school fund reductions. This looks at different scenarios of student investment account reductions. So we were trying to kind of just gauge like, what does it look like when we kind of add everything together? And so, you know, lower reduction in state school fund, small change in student investment account, even at that sort of best case scenario, we're still looking at about a 5% reduction, $4.5 million. It's probably not likely going to be in that zone. So if we kind of look in the middle of the road, you know, when Ryan gave an update to the board a couple of weeks ago about the budget, and he was kind of talking about a range, you may have noticed that the range was really significant. I think we said anywhere from like $5 to $9 million. That's a huge range, but it's kind of just because there's so many moving parts. So you can see based on this chart that, you know, none of these numbers are good numbers. Some of them are scary, but we anticipate it's going to land somewhere in the middle of all of this. We just don't know enough yet.
Okay.
So kind of going back to this chart and just kind of thinking, you know, some of these numbers looking at like, you know, $4.5 million, $6 million, $7 million, $9 million. And then just looking at what we're about to submit for our proposed budget for next year. If you look at our general fund budget, what do we spend our money on? We spend the majority of our money on salaries and benefits, on people. And when you look at the dollar amount of the general fund budget, over $70 million. And so what we know is that whatever reductions we make when salaries and benefits make up the majority of our spending, we know that it's unrealistic to think that we could make significant reductions without reducing the cost of salaries and benefits, which in effect means reducing staff. This is kind of like our everything rolled up into one. We anticipate general fund reductions, reiterating Ryan's 2 priorities. Number 1, preserving school days. Number 2, maintaining a strong workforce. We want to keep as many people employed as we can, and we want to keep kids in school. The reality is it's unlikely to achieve balance without reducing our salary and benefit costs when it represents such a huge % of our spending. And we know that we've got some work to do, even though we don't know enough to know exactly what a reduction looks like right now. What we are doing is working and planning and using a lot of resources that have been made available to us through the Smarter School Spending initiative that we've been working in for the last couple of years. So we're starting a process to identify like our highest potential opportunities to shift resources. And so there's a lot of tools in here, anything from like reducing our operational costs, which are kind of like your first go-tos. You're going to look at how you can reduce spending that's not very impactful to the classroom. So obviously looking at things like that, but even looking at our service delivery models. Are there different ways we can be doing things? Are there more efficient ways we can be doing some things? And really diving deep into the areas that have the highest potential. So these resources allow us to kind of score ourselves on the areas with the highest potential. And then we spend more time on those areas doing a deeper dive to do more work around what the potential cost savings could be. We're just starting that work, so I don't have a lot of information for you about it, but that is essentially what we're trying to do, because once we do have the information and start to know what things are going to look like, we're going to have to act quickly, because it's likely going to be in the middle of the summer, and we're going to be preparing for students to come back in the fall, and it's going to have to move really quickly. We'll have to be able to respond very quickly. So this is my last slide, just to kind of touch base on a couple of upcoming key dates. So the proposed budget document is going to be released tomorrow. So that will be posted on the website. It'll be posted in board book. And I believe some of you are having hard copies delivered tomorrow. Some people are picking one up at the district office. So everyone should have access to the proposed budget document starting tomorrow, knowing that we're having virtual meetings, knowing that we're wanting to make sure that public comment, we still have good avenues for public comment. We wanted to get the budget document out at least 5 days before the meeting. A reminder that there are no assumptions about COVID-19 impacts in our proposed budget. The first budget meeting is next Thursday. The next economic and revenue forecast is going to be released on May 20th. It will likely show a significant reduction in revenue that will likely trigger the state legislature to meet in a special session. That's not a for sure, but it's an assumption. The school board is meeting again on May 21st. So we'll be able to give you an update on the 21st if anything has changed, or if we don't really have any new information. But in reality, the budget committee meetings and the final school board meeting of the year are going to happen probably before we have any significant updates to the information we just shared tonight. And so just kind of keeping that in mind. We're not alone. We're all in this together. All 197 school districts across the state are experiencing the same thing we're experiencing. And we're all kind of plowing through, doing our work, still trying to put together a transparent, purposeful budget document that has good information in it. And so that's kind of where we're at today. And then I'm assuming there might be some questions, and Ryan and I are here to answer them if we can.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olivia, for this really thorough and detailed updates. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take the opportunity, if my colleague board members are okay with it, to ask you a few questions I'll go into the reserves. If you don't mind going to the back to the slide that shows the pattern of the reserves. And I have two questions about that. The first one is why the unappropriated reserves for PERS changed from $1.3 million as of last fiscal year to $0 in this fiscal year and the financial statements, and how would that translate here? Which block of the reserves is it?
Are you talking about the orange section?
The PERS reserves is the orange section, right?
Yeah, so we did set aside a pretty substantial amount. It kind of grew. It grew pretty significantly in 17-18, shrunk a little bit in 18-19, but between that and the other surplus reserves, that's primarily what we've been using to offset our operating deficit. So the impact of the PERS increase has already happened. We're already a year into that. And so we're kind of self-adjusted to that now. And so there isn't really a need to have a set aside, nor do we at this point have a luxury of having any, additional set asides based on the current situation.
Yeah, and I just want to confirm, so far we're expecting by the end of the year a projected 14.4% overall reserves, and we are still going to stay above the 12% by the end of this fiscal year, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think, Vince, you had your hands up, and I'm not sure if there's anyone else, but if you have a question, make sure you raise your hand on the virtual thing.
So I think most of us are aware that Portland Public Schools went ahead and adopted establishing furloughs for the remainder of the school year and accessing work-share. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, and were you considering bringing a proposal to the board?
So we've had conversations with our associations about that. At this point, our associations don't feel comfortable or confident with the design of that program, understanding that there are a number of weeks of wait for unemployment and some of those other considerations about revenue or payout on that base versus current salary. So I don't think that we'll actually be moving forward with a similar program to Portland Public Care.
Okay. Thank you.
Lou, do you have a question?
Oh, mine was more around the public comment part, just because there's a lot of things going out online and people are easily missing opportunities for public comment across the board, not just the district, but just in general. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how we're going to make sure that this is accessible to the public.
Yeah, I think with the release tomorrow, we'll be able to kind of more widely share. We wanted to make sure that the budget document was available online before we kind of advertise the seeking of public comment. I anticipate that somebody that's interested in public comment will need some time to actually look at the proposed budget. And so we plan to do some of that work tomorrow through social media channels, which for us tend to generally be the most effective way to reach out with solicitation for public comment under the current circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we do have budget committee meetings, there is always the opportunity for public comment built into those meetings as well. And the budget committee includes the current board members as well as 7 other community members. So the budget committee meetings are usually pretty big in terms of participation, but it also brings in other community perspectives that we don't necessarily have with just 7 board members. So that is another benefit of having a separate budget committee. And then that budget comes forward to the board for final adoption.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering because I think it's good if we start getting people's voices in that aren't necessarily heard with district stuff, especially budget matters, so that we're getting new voices in too. Thanks.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I want to check in if there's anyone else. We have Vince.
So my next question is about PERS employer contribution rates and how they're indexed and what the time spacing, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, but I heard a conversation about them being indexed at a higher performance level, what, in 2018 or 2019, that would be last year. So looking forward, as we're looking at a fiscal storm for the next 2 years at least, are we going to be looking at dramatically higher PERS contribution rates to go along with this?
Not necessarily. And I'll use an example from the last time we had a downturn. And it's because when PERS rates change, the information that those rates are based on is usually already a couple of years old. So PERS does an actuarial valuation every calendar year. The actuarial valuations from even numbered years inform the rates that go into effect like a year and a half later. And so like in this situation, if we have a downturn and a pretty quick upturn in a couple of years, it's actually the opposite. And that's what was experienced last time, where when state revenues went down significantly, the PERS rate went down at the same time, but then 2 years later went up. And so I don't know, haven't really heard a lot about PERS. Is kind of secondary at this point based on everything else that's going on. And what's really hard is that PERS is still working to implement all of the changes from legislative action last year. And so we don't anticipate any change to our PERS rate for July 1, 2021 because of that legislative action that was taken, where the unfunded liability was re-amortized over a longer period of time. So our PERS rates on July 1, 2021 probably aren't going to be that significantly different from what they look like now. But July 1 of 2023 may look different, but it's so far out that it's really hard to even anticipate like what that would look like. Yeah. The PERS board does set the assumed rate of return. And that's what you're talking about, Vince. And so it's known that actual returns have been less than the assumed rate of return. So that generally means that eventually the rates will have to increase.
Right. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go for the last comment or question from Jay, and then we'll have to move on. Jay Cohart.
Ryan, in your perspective of conversations that need to happen in the next 60 to 90 days, you've talked a little bit about conversations with non-represented groups in the district, and you talked about talking to our unions about would they be willing to do a Portland Public furlough model. And I think there's plenty of room for pluses and minuses on both sides of that model. Is there any plan, or is there any plan or tradition where you could sit with that same group of people and talk about wage freezes or options other than cuts? I mean, is that something that happens now in the next 60 days, or what can you tell us?
I'd say there's a couple things. One is, our principals and non-rep group has taken a pay freeze, so our and no steps. So we've done that in sort of anticipation of this. We have ongoing negotiations right now with our teachers and our classified. In both cases, it's 1 year and it's focused just on salary and benefits. And so tomorrow we meet with our classified group. We met with our certified or licensed group last week. So those conversations are going on right now. The other thing is that once we get to that May 20th, if there's notice of a legislative session, then I think it's also time for both all of our groups, and including the board, to advocate for funding for public education. So Again, the governor can set a percentage and it has to be across all groups. And at the same time, if there's a legislative session, the legislature has the ability to make adjustments in those percentages of reductions. And I think that's when we'll need advocacy.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the most important things that the board could do is really advocating for the good work our district is doing. And as I really understand and appreciate the tough position the governor would be in to balance all different buckets, but public education is really the cornerstone for taking care of our kids and being able to be resilient enough to get back on track. So we want to make sure that we can be as loud as board members. We have the platform to be as loud as possible and say, here's the great things and accomplishments that the school district is doing. And I want to really thank you, Ryan and Olivia, for this update. And one silver lining of having to go with a budget with a critical assumption not there, but doing it the way that we're doing it is that we're doing it right. We have a process and we know our priorities, and the way that we prepare our budgets makes us resilient enough to be able to incorporate updates as they come in. There's lots of uncertainties here, but knowing that we have district staff who are dedicated to make sure that we can prioritize our budget is really assuring for me, and I'm really looking forward to navigate this really difficult conversation. But I couldn't imagine that we could do it better without really great people that are leading the way, taking the district administration and principals. Making that decision is really appreciated. It means that you're walking the talk, and it's really I'm really thankful for that. Thank you. All right, thank you, Olivia. And how we all think about moving on to consolidated action? Are we all comfortable with continuing going there? So let's go with that. And I apologize, I might get some water and dates. I need to break my fasting. So while we're doing that, but next up is consolidated action. As a reminder, the items under this portion of agenda are for action. Does anyone have a question about anything in the consolidated action? So anything you want to pull out, let's take all the things that you want to pull out first. Lou?
I just had a question about the minutes. I don't know if they need to get pulled out or what.
Absolutely, yeah. Which minutes, 9 or 16?
I'm not sure what, I think it was actually both of them. There was just I know some concerns brought up by not just myself, other people that I think should be captured in there.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We'll pull it out and see the discussion. We could table it and vote on it later on if there's some edits we need to incorporate. Any other things that we want to pull out of consolidated action?
I would like to pull out the special education, the IGBAH.
Okay. Therese. Anything else? Wonderful. So let's start with Lou with the minutes. What do you have about the minutes?
I just remember not only myself, but I think Sarah brought it up at one point too. Concerns about students that were homeless and don't have access to education. I know for sure I brought that up as a concern, and also being mindful of helping students who are going to be getting no passes because of their life circumstances as they transition into the next grades. I thought those were just points that should be included in the minutes to show that the board was already thinking ahead about these students that are facing other circumstances out of their control. Another one was like students in abusive households. And I know there's in the minutes, it captured all of our appreciation for the district, which I think is really good to capture. And we do appreciate everything that's done administratively and with teachers and administrators, but it was something that was brought up as thinking ahead. Those kind of comments should also be included. And I don't know if they usually are or not, because I'm still somewhat newish with that. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Usually the minutes are they cover an umbrella or overall of the discussion, but definitely if there's something that you would like to make sure we incorporate, we could table the minutes and incorporate the comments that you mentioned. I'll just check in with the board secretary here with Julie real quick. We do not have any deadline to pass the minutes, so we could go for tabling them. Then
So I'd like to work with Lou offline.
So we'll have Julie work with you offline, and we'll make sure that we capture the discussion items that you mentioned. You don't remember accurately whether it was 9th or the 16th, correct?
I remember I brought it up at the first meeting, and then on the 9th, and then the next one, I remember Sarah had brought something up because it was related to the Oregonian article that came up. And
Right.
so I like re-emphasized the same point that was made at the previous meeting a little bit, but in a different manner. So it was just like, it was just brought up in both meetings, but I can't remember which one. That's the problem, is I don't remember which one. So if it can't be captured, I just think it's good that if we're thinking ahead of these issues that students are definitely going to be facing moving into next year, that it should be noted that we were thinking about it already.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very good point. So I'll, if there's no objection, we'll table both April 9th and April 16th minutes, and we'll have Julie connect with you offline about these two comments. Wonderful. Thank you. Any other comments about the minutes, or we're all okay with that? Beautiful. So we'll go next with IGBAH, Special Education Evaluation Procedures. And Therese, what's your comments about it?
I remember from our discussion that we talked about the use of the word suspected as maybe not being the best choice for item 4 on the first page. Suspected of having, sorry, my screen just closed, suspected of having a disability, even though they are advancing from grade to grade. And I'm just curious, that word is still there. And so I was wondering if someone can inform us about the process around, well, discussion around the point that was raised at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you. Brian, do we have someone?
Yeah, Erica can talk to you about the conversation that she had with OSBA, because all of that language is included in that conversation.
So actually, in that action cover page for this particular item, I entered in the information that I got from OSBA. OSBA replied and said that since special education is monitored by ODE for compliance with IDEA, it is not recommended that districts modify any of that language.
Okay. I mean, that's so not even making a modification of switching out a verb.
Correct. And I asked specifically for the items that you guys talked about. I can actually pull up the email if you'd like, but I asked about the term of Indian. I asked about the suspected of having a disability, and then there was one more item. It was the introductory sentence, third paragraph.
Yes. Okay.
So all 3 items that you guys brought up in the board meeting, I shot those all to OSBA asking if we could modify that language.
Lou?
Was that a recommendation to not change the wording, or is it you can't change the wording?
That is a recommendation.
Because we're following state law and IDEA, ODE compliance regulations for IDEA.
Right, and if Ryan or Melissa, anyone would correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it is our subscription to OSBA gives us a little bit of backing in terms of, they say, if you pass this policy, you get some assurance that you're compliant with state law and other regulations. If we change it and they say, no, we don't back you, we might be vulnerable that the policies we're passing are not 100% bulletproof. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a, when you adopt policy from OSBA, it's vetted legally, and then it's supported when you get into a potential legal situation. So that's always the challenge in this, is that maintaining guidance while also understanding local context, right?
Yeah.
And so in this one, if it's aligned with IDEA, which is the federal statutes around special education and state statutes around special education, my recommendation would be to maintain the word suspected based on that.
All right. Lou?
However, it's a prerogative of the board. So
yeah. Yeah, eventually it's our votes. We have the decision which policies and how we pass them. Lou or anyone else? We're good.
No, I will say that I think that I understand the process. I think that seems very clear to me. That is a little bit disappointing. I do struggle to believe that we cannot tap resources to help us find an appropriate alternate word that would be as defensible as suspected. It doesn't seem like it's a super complicated word to get the meaning of without having to use a term that has had loaded meaning for particular groups. I mean, there's a lot more in consolidated action than just this item. So it's not something that, I'm sorry, my dog is, somebody must be daring to walk in front of our house at the moment or something like that. I'll just move. So so yeah, I mean, this is not something that is going to probably keep consolidated action from going forward, but I do just want to say that this is, well, bad on OSBA then, and we should find a mechanism to give them a hand slap for not finding a better word.
I couldn't find the unmute button. I was just gonna say that it's kind of like great that we have their backing for a policy, but I feel like that also limits our ability to bring in other things if we're relying on a word that has, like Therese has been bringing up, like loaded meanings, that we can't change the word or we'll lose their backing. That doesn't sound like it's a very reciprocal relationship. It sounds like it's a controlled relationship at that point, of like, we still can control the language in your policies if you want our backing, if you change it, you won't have our backing, because that's the message they're getting, is that that's their recommendation, and if we don't go with it, we don't have their backing, unless I'm hearing this wrong. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? And I'm not saying to like hold up the voting or anything like that, but I think that it's worth thinking about moving forward, that if there is that level of control over a word, that we're trying to improve the policy language in the district so it doesn't have those implications, those underlying implications and historic implications associated with it. So I was just wanted to express that as all.
Yeah. What I'd share is that so OSBA typically comes with language that they're recommended, for consideration, or required, and so there's sort of different tiers of related to that. And usually the required comes to us after a legislative session when there's been laws changed, and so it's the language from the new laws that is embedded here. So I hear what you're saying, Lou, and I think that I kind of see this range coming from them across those three echelons. Echelon's probably not a good word, but 3 tiers.
It's a fine word. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I guess I don't feel like that really addresses the concern that Lou just raised about whether or not we have the capacity to be, if you will, I guess, more progressive or more inclusive versus less from a standard. I mean, this is what I think. I think that nobody that crafted that language was sitting down thinking to themselves, how can we use a word that has this rather targeted meaning against particular groups of people that will further marginalize them with our vocabulary. Oh, let's use suspected. That sounds like a good word for that. I'm sure that that's not at all what happened. People use the word because the word makes sense from a verbiage standpoint of thought to, but not know for certain. You suspect something, and so let's put it in there. And I think that our point back to them is, yeah, but that word means other things as well. And so can we choose a word? It's discouraging that they wouldn't want to choose a word and recommend a word that is something other than that. And I don't, again, I mean, I think this is not about whether or not there's an intention on their part. I think that I feel some responsibility to not accept that. So I feel some responsibility to say that good intentions are not sufficient if the outcome still leaves a particular group of people exposed in some way that is not necessary to get the job done. And so while I don't want us, of course, to set ourselves up for liability, I would still advocate that we take some leadership over the message that we send to our district through our words, and we find a different word. And that's my thought, that's my leaning toward that. Obviously I'm one person. And so that is not, I've put that out there. And if other folks feel like this is not something to spend time on, as one person, I can't stop that anyway. But I feel like I would be remiss to not say that I think it's a good idea for us to set an example. And if we choose a word, and if we consult our legal counsel to confirm that our word choice should not open us up to any legal vulnerabilities, then we should do it. That's my 2 cents, or however many cents that was worth on that.
So I think as a board, you have a couple of options. You can, you can still kick it back, and we could talk to, there are policies that we've developed that have gone outside of OSBA. Our transgender, gender nonconforming policy went to, we lost COG. So there's other, if that's the prerogative of the board, then we can look at it that way. I think that's definitely within your scope. So, because policy is definitely your thing. So
I would just caution, this is from the OAR, just FYI, that the word suspected is written in the OAR. So I don't know where, where you stand with that. I understand having, taking a stand with OSBA about the recommendations of language that they're using, but we're talking about Oregon law and division 15 for special education. So it's a little bit more than just OSBA. It's OSBA explaining what, the OARs to us as far as, what we need to put into our policies, but it's word for word from OAR 581-015-2080. It says children suspected. So
yeah,
I just want to make sure that that's out there, just so that, you have all the information.
Yeah, and those OARs are legally binding for us from ODE. So the course to change the word suspected itself would be to take it up with ODE, and then our policy will be compliant with whatever wording ODE says. Okay, Lou?
Okay, I promise I'll quit after this one. I just wanted to point out that laws are not written with an equitable lens at all.
Correct.
They're written quite the opposite, and so are bills and legislation that's passed. So I just wanted to, I had to say it. So yeah, that's just my last thought on that, and understanding that the exact word has a different, like there's multiple meanings of words, right? There's other words that mean the same exact thing, and if it is compliant with the legal language, then it shouldn't be the problem. But yeah, I'm gonna stop now, but I just wanted to point that.
Thank you so much. Let's see how the rest of the board think about where we're leaning about kicking back and explore a further discussion around it, or pass it, or any other option. I think Vince raised your hand, and if there's anyone else who would like to chime in. So
yeah,
Vincent.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say something, because I'm an employee of OSBA now, and I've been on the job for a little over a month now. And I can tell you that the encounters that I've had with staff, they are definitely equity minded and they're very progressive. I can't speak specifically to this particular case because I didn't interact with the policy team, but I think that if they had the ability or felt that they had the legal space to may use more equitable language or more inclusive language, they would probably do so. That said, the legal and policy teams are very conservative and they're interested in protecting the membership, and that's us. So I'm going to leave it there. And I think, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Jay?
I'm with Vince. I would leave it there. And I would recommend that the language that you, Therese, used were about 5 or 6 words considered. I forget what you said. They're very thoughtful. That you would bounce that to the Department of Ed and say, would you guys consider using this instead of suspect? But I also know, as an ex-lawyer, they might have done some pretty heavy thinking about it already. So I wouldn't assume that they were necessarily not equity minded. I would suspect, there's that word, I would suspect that they had some other things in mind. So I would move ahead, but feel real comfortable saying to them, did you guys have anything else in mind and would you consider amendment? But I'd vote for it right now.
Okay. Do I hear any inclination of one way or another for the majority of the board? Where do you think we should go? Sarah?
Yeah, I want to echo what Vince said about OSBA and equity. In my experience with the Legislative Policy Board, it's very much felt like they are working hard to sort of drag more reluctant districts forward on equity, and it's one of the central things that is discussed with policies, and was one of the things that the policy committee said needed to be a central lens through which all the policy decisions for the what we decide to work on in the legislature, or we use a equity lens to look at all of those. So I believe that this word was put in there because we need to stay compliant with the law, and that if they could have found a different way to say it, they probably would have. I don't think it's something that they just did arbitrarily. I mean, I don't know that, but that would be my assumption. And if that's the case, then obviously it's something that they feel we need to use the language that follows the law in order to make sure that we're in compliance with the state's laws that have been set for us. I think we should, I think it is worth potentially addressing with ODE, because I think it's a problem they are not at OSBA.
Just to clarify, I'm not suggesting the problem is with OSBA. I'm not going to pretend to be knowledgeable enough about exactly where all words come from. So I might have been overreaching in my statement about pushing back with them specifically. I was responding to the statement that it was recommended that we keep the language rather than encouraged that we find more equitable language. If their position is that we would be out of compliance with the law, then I would like, I mean, I guess I don't know, maybe they kind of said that. I guess I heard that as a softer response of don't mess with this, as opposed to the law states this wording and you're required to use exactly what the law states. And if we are required to use exactly what the law states, then it's not a recommendation. It is a requirement, in which case they could call it such. So I guess my point is only that whoever it rests with, wherever the word came from, if the word came from the OAR, then that's where the complaint needs to be lodged. Then I'd like to recommend and ask OSBA to advocate on our behalf to change that. That is what they do, and that's who they are for us. And so I'd like to see them take that up, because I think that they are in a better position than one single school board is to take that to ODE and say, you're not in the, well, your words are not representing an equity lens. So again, I'm not going to suggest that we don't move forward on our consolidated action. We need to have special education policies. And so this isn't something where I would say we cannot equitably serve the students in our district because of this. It's not that kind of a statement. It's a statement that leaves our students in our district and the families that we serve vulnerable to a range of perceptions about us as a district, perceptions about what they will be met with within our district, and potentially, an upsetting or triggering moment for them to read that kind of language around something that is intended to describe them. And so I think we can still serve them. And this policy and this word will not interrupt our capacity to serve them, but it might interrupt how they see us when we do it. And I think that if it does interrupt how they see us, we should care a great deal to get that changed, whoever or wherever that authority needs to come from.
Okay. Brian.
So one of the things I was thinking is reaching out to the assistant soup at ODE, Candace Felt, who's works to support students with disabilities, and to just share that perspective with her. That's one of my other thoughts about how to progress with this.
I feel really comfortable that that is a proactive move on our part as a district, and I can live with that.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I know in Candace, I know that she will recognize and understand that perspective.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's really good path forward. And yeah, thank you. So with that, I'm feeling that's correct me if I'm wrong, but the feeling is that IGBH, the board is comfortable passing it as is with all the discussion here and action forward that Ryan will take offline with ODE. Any more thoughts or any discussion? See none. I would like to entertain a motion that specifies what we're voting on. You can say consolidate action, excluding the minutes. So do I hear a motion, or is there anyone who would like to be recognized for a motion?
I move to approve consolidated action, excluding the meeting minutes from the 9th and the 16th.
Do I hear a second?
Second. Vince Adams.
All right. So is there any further discussion on the consolidated action decision? It's been moved by Therese Jones and second by Vince Adams to approve the consolidated action, excluding the meeting minutes on April 9th and April 16th. Let's take a roll call vote. Director Jay Conroy.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sarah McDonald.
Aye.
Dr. Vince Adams.
Aye.
Director Luhoy Wybear.
Aye.
Director Therese Jones.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Is there anyone else I missed? No. Passes. So passes unanimously.
So before we move on,
Yes.
Peter Henning was in there as the new principal for Adams Elementary School, and we're just excited to have Peter come and join our team. He's coming with experience as a principal to us, which I think will be a strength in such a precarious time. So this will be someone who has that experience. Also, he has lots of experience with Avid, and he started with Teach for America. So I think he'll come with a lot of great skills and strengths, including a background in special education. So we're just excited to have him move here and join our team. So thanks for the action to make that happen.
Absolutely. Welcome, Peter. And usually in board meetings, Ryan brings a principal.
We'll do that in the fall.
Wonderful. We're looking forward to that. So whenever we hopefully go back to the normal or whatever will be normal in the fall. And it's great resume that I looked at it when you made the announcement. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
For consolidated information, is there any points in the consolidated information that you would like to discuss? Let's start with what are they? Lou?
JEC.
All right, JEC admissions. Last one. Anything else? Let's see if I see. No. And Vince?
I would just like to say I really appreciated the very concise language in the two ARs, JECB and JECBB. Well done.
Wonderful. Anything else you want to pull out? All right, seeing none, let's go with the JEC admissions. Lou, what's your comments?
Sorry, I was trying to find the mute button. I was just curious, is it part of like policy stuff that the Illegal Immigration and Immigration Reform Act of 1996 is included in this one? I was curious to why that one was included.
Do you mind if you can point at the page or?
On page 2, it's under legal references. What I know of that law, I didn't see anything in this policy that like is a source, that law would be a source for. And so I was curious as to what part of the policy is informed by that federal law.
Got it.
It might have something to do with, and I'm just guessing right now, I would have to look into it if we want to pull it out and for me to go looking, but I'm wondering if it has something about something to do with students who are cannot be excluded from admission because they don't have a residence or they're not under the supervision of a parent. It could have, there might be some connection there, but I'd have to go digging for that. And if you'd like me to do that, I'm happy to do it.
It would be great to know like why it's on there, because I think that also sends a message on there. I think Jay knows what it is, possibly maybe raising his hand.
Can she say that? Can you say the last part again?
Could you say the last part one more time?
Oh, Jay's raising his hand, so maybe he knows what the answer is.
Oh, sorry. Jay, go for it.
My comment would be, if you look at that material that was struck from the old, it includes birth certificate, and I think the feds are saying no, you don't get to ask people to show their birth certificates all the time. So I would bet it's not about new language as it is taking out that old language. But I'm not an expert in it, I'm just betting.
That's what I was wondering too, because like everything about that federal law, like I read it before, I reread it when I seen it included, and I was curious. I was like, that's interesting because nothing in the policy looked like it needed that referenced as a source, like this version of it. So it might just be something that's hanging out there from a prior version. And I was just wanted to recommend that if it's not informing the policy, there's no reason to cite it.
Okay.
So it is in the sample policy. So that means that it has been referenced in some way, shape, or form. So like Melissa said, we'd be more than happy to inquire as to which portions of the policy it's actually informing for you. And then I can put those on the cover sheet for the second read so that you can have that reference.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions on the JEC, or we're good with it? Wonderful. See none. The next point and the last point in the agenda is the board member comments. Do any of the board members wish to make a comment? So we'll start with Sarah, and then Vince, and then Jay.
I just wanted to welcome Lindsay to her first Corvallis School Board meeting. I look forward to meeting you at some point. It's quite a time to jump in and learn the ropes working in our district. So I guess it's trial by fire, but we're glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. We have Lindsay and Julie next to each other, and they're both wearing black.
Not too close next to each other, but next
Close,
to each other.
more than 6 feet apart. But even so, to be able to have the ability to do a transition and do a transition well under these circumstances is really something we feel fortunate about, and to have Lindsay joining our team. So yeah, welcome, Lindsay. It was on my list too, Sarah, FYI.
Yeah, welcome, Lindsay. And yeah, I have been really impressed by your great work. As you may all know, Lindsay helped prepare the packet and did the announcements to the public about the meeting, and did lots of good work behind the scenes, and immediately was able to do it successfully. So thank you, Lindsay, and welcome aboard. All right, Vince.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because my final comment is tonight staff really shined. We had got great reports from our facilities team, and from teaching and learning, and from finance, Olivia Bravo, and with Lindsay coming on board. It's a proud board member night. Just wanted to say.
Agreed. Jay. Let me unmute you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add the welcome to Lindsay. I look forward to meeting you. I just said about how excited you should be. Because it's such a red hot good district. Great teachers, great parents, great leadership. So you're really fortunate, and we're fortunate to have you come. My other comment kind of goes to as we wind towards the end of the year. Here it is, May. I worry about acknowledging people who have given long-term to the district, retirements, that in past we would have, gatherings or chances to say things. So just a kind of a heads up that as we go quickly into the semi-summer, we need to remind ourselves to be grateful to people who are saying, I'm retiring. And so just throwing that out for a thought.
Absolutely, thank you. Any comments?
I'm really glad we got Julie's Golden Apple celebration in before this all hit. So we got to acknowledge Julie, because we're missing her party, and sort of feels like a sad way to go out, but we love you.
She did the thumbs up.
Thumbs up from Julie. All right, Lou.
I just wanted to again express my appreciation to everybody in the district for all your hard work, because it's not getting easier. I feel like it's getting a little bit rougher as the quarter is continuing on, and you can hear and see the dedication, and not just the teachers, but in the administrators' voices and in their work. So I appreciate you all with all the work you're doing, and I appreciate my fellow board members too, because we put in a lot of energy into reading things and have lots going on ourselves, and I appreciate you all too. So I'm feeling very appreciative today, so I just wanted to express that.
Thank you, Lou. And Therese?
Yeah, so I everything everyone has said, I'm very much in agreement with all of those things. And I wanted to share two things. One, very quickly, is that Vince is wearing a suit and I'm wearing a bathrobe. And that feels really appropriate to me, like for who we are. So I appreciate that. We're still ourselves in these meetings. I think that's great. And the other thing I wanted to say is that yesterday I had this really phenomenal music time with my son, doing the music lesson that his teacher had sent out, watching the Vancouver Symphony play Peter and the Wolf. And we listened to it, and it got us into listening to classical music and talking about what we like about it. And then that led into playing for him. I played this rendition of Air in G string Bach's piece that has been performed by one of the performers from the group Two Cellos. And he plays it on a cello in an empty arena in Croatia. And it's called Alone Together. And I wanted to share with you that I would encourage you to watch it because it is very moving. It's a 30-minute performance, but the first 8 minutes he's playing this piece by Bach on the cello. And he has spliced into it images of people around the world wearing their masks, going to work, standing on their balconies, distanced from each other. And what I loved about it was that, it was beautifully shot. It's a beautiful piece of music. But also my son and I sat there watching this, and we cried. And like we had like wonderful, very healthy, cathartic. There is great sadness and there is great beauty. And we are trying to make space for both of those things. But our pathway into that was that we found ourselves through a music assignment from the lovely Ms. Kinney, sitting at our computer, looking at and talking about music and what music has meant to us. And I feel thankful for that assignment yesterday, because I doubt that we would have taken the time to sit there together and explore other music and find our way to one of our favorite performers and see this new piece that he has put out, and have this entire moment of grieving and being simultaneously grateful for being able to be together, for being able to share the moment. It was clear that we feel a lot of competing things right now. And I am just really thankful that in some way our school district helped to set that moment up through what is a less than ideal way of educating. But I know if my child had been at school, if we had figured out a way that our schools would still be open and all of this would still be happening, he and I would not have had that moment. And I am thankful for that time. And I would encourage you to watch it, and I would encourage you to do it with tissues, because it is a very moving piece. And it is even like in thinking back on it, I feel the emotions of listening to this very melancholic music in these scenes of spaces that just don't have people in them anymore, that used to have people in them, and people in masks that didn't used to have to wear masks. So it was very moving. And a thank you to our music teachers for trying to continue to engage our kids in learning and finding their emotions at this time.
Thanks for sharing, Therese. And if you don't mind, if you could share the link with the hashtag board, that would be great.
I would be happy to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. It reminds me of Andrea Bocelli when he performed on Easter from Milan. It was really moving, and also I recommend folks to watch it. It was really, really moving, and I can't wait to see that one too. Sarah.
I just want to sort of latch on to what Therese was just saying, because I think we talk about the teachers that are our kids' classroom teachers. We talk about teacher appreciation. And I've had wonderful experiences with music with the same teacher. My daughter did listen to Peter and the Wolf yesterday, but our fun experience with music teacher assignments was in previous weeks, we've been practicing beatboxing. And so I've been learning how to beatbox with my daughter as a result of assignments that have come through school. And we've also had fabulous artwork that has been produced because art teachers have shared art with us, and then kids have been working on things at home, and fabulous stories shared by librarians. And so it's not, I want to, as we think about Teacher Appreciation Week, I want to make sure that we're also remembering the music teachers and librarians and PE teachers and art teachers who are also still engaging our students, giving them Tabata workouts to do in the backyard and things like that. So there's a lot going on. It's really good, and it also gives families an opportunity to do some of these things together, which I think is fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any further comments? I'm having goosebumps right now, just hearing from all of you and reflecting on this night. It was really productive night, and some people say we're just doing education, but we're doing so much. It's not just education. It's everything is encompassed with the work that we're doing in the district. So thank you for our superintendents and for staff who presented today, and also for all our educators. I'm just very proud that we're resilient and we're doing what we can to take care of each other and find the strength in the moments that we are in to navigate through these difficult times. So on that note, have a great, wonderful night, and we are adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.